Hello, 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 and welcome to this edition of the Jolly Heretic. Now, I was thinking to myself today, I was thinking that this sort of transsexuality thing whereby you state what your preferred pronoun is, and you state that you are they, there, and you are not even she, him, you're him, and this sort of thing. It's a little bit like the reversal of normal nobility. Under the traditional system that we had in England, you had the system where the nobles would have certain privileges, and it was actually illegal to give them the wrong name, to give them the wrong title. It was a crime to call a mister, to call a lord a mister. And it struck me that perhaps we've got to a kind of a reversal of this system, but it's not based around high order values and whatever. It's not based around bravery and whatever. It's based around victimhood, and you are more noble the more the more victimized you are. And so I was thinking that we who are scientists of this kind of area and who are dissidents should come up with our own system of titles. And I'm thinking that system of titles would begin with the most based, and people who are the most based, they would be like the most honourable. Those people would have been sacked from their job publicly, the most based Noah Carl, or would have caused a huge amount of controversy due to their very, very, very based research. And that being the case, I would like to introduce you to the most based Emil Kirkegaard, who has not been on here a long time. He also has the post-nominal RW, the most based Emil Kirkegaard Rational Wiki, RW. That's another honour that you can have if you're part of our group. If you have a Rational Wiki page, then you are the most based Emil Kirkegaard RW. So, Emil, while I sign into the old entropy, could you be kind enough to tell the assembled what's been on your mind since we last met?
Yes, so while you were blabbering here, the first thing I was thinking that you say that we should have, titles, and we were talking about the most honorable, but that seems like not the best way, because if you can actually make the media, since they are all obsessed about these pronouns, shouldn't we just pick some proper pronouns that, reflect? So I guess you can be based Dotton and based or basedness, or do you have some good examples of pronouns that we should be using? I know that many people have been trolling about these for a while.
I was thinking that in terms of that title system, it should be the most based, anyone that's done a huge media controversy or has been sacked from their university. The right based, that would be people who are right based. That's people who've had honorary titles withdrawn, people like Michael Woodley or AJ Figueredo or whatever, something like that. A minor controversy, not in the mainstream media, but in the academic world. I was thinking the based, that would simply be people that do controversial academic research, but who have managed to keep out of trouble, like Hannah Rinderman or Guy Madison or whatever. That would be the equivalent of a baron. And then the knighthood, that would be the red-pilled. That's the red pill. That would be like the lowest rank of the new nobility, the red pilled. And then there would be people who were the purple pilled, and that would be like the purple pilled Jordan Peterson, the purple pilled Steven Pinker. That's people that are aware of the baseness, but who can't quite bring themselves to go public with it. And then perhaps you'd have the non-nobility, the ignobilis, would be people who were the blue pilled. And then lower even than that, like the same rank as a shepherd, be the woke, the woke. So and then so almost all university lecturers would be either the blue pilled or the woke, and you'd have the most woke, and that's would be the scum of the scum.
I see. Yeah. So what you're saying is that we need to have the Noah Carl scientific article. I don't know if readers remember this one. I think Michael did a talk where we walked over this one with Noah, where you have the media attacks on intelligence research, and you basically we need a live version of this, so that when the pronouns keep changing, you have to constantly go to this website and look up who's the most based person today, and have they declined by saying something that wasn't sufficiently based, and then maybe they got someone.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. There should be an ongoing basedness competition, whereby at a particular time, such as when that stuff was published on OkCupid, then you would have been.
Yes.
Like super based, like his basedness, his bastiness, and then perhaps he would have declined by doing some quite boring paper on some wacky country like Eritrea or something, and then gone up again with your recent mental illness and left wingless paper to being again most.
So what you're proposing here is that we scrape some more dating sites and release the data. And I do have some news to report here in that there are a lot more dating sites nowadays, and there's a bunch more fun ones. There's even some for Muslim people, and I guess you can have tranny dating. I guess there is a website for that somewhere. So maybe we should just scrape all the dating sites and release all the data at once, and we'll try to beat the OkCupid of 2016 achievement.
One thing that I didn't understand, though, is that shouldn't these dating sites aren't the people that use dating sites primarily are strategist type people? Aren't they basically up for sex and short-term relationships and whatever? So doesn't this skew the data in a direction that makes it more difficult to sort of make sense of people beyond those that use dating sites?
You could say that. I mean, there's if you scrape the OkCupid data as we did in 2016, and you have all these thousands of data. There is a lot of these questions that are about what do you call it, life history speed, right? And there were some students who did as their master's thesis. They analyzed the OkCupid data. They sent me like a nice email saying, "Oh, I downloaded your data and I used this for my thesis." And they found that you can construct kind of a nice life history speed based on these OkCupid ones. I didn't actually look at the distribution, but of course you could do that, and you could kind of see if it's super skewed. If you look at OkCupid, at least, the dating sites, they tend to skew extremely much to the left, like political left. But I think it's mainly because dating sites are not very useful if you're in a small city. You need to be in a place with sufficient population density, and most of the large population density areas are quite left-wing. But you are right that I would think that kind of a traditional conservative people, they don't really use dating sites as much as the more left-wing urban kind of elites, or at least urban people do.
They meet people at church.
That's right. Well, maybe not at church, but yeah, definitely they meet people in real life, and so you don't need to do kind of an online how do I find the next good week's lay sort of thing.
I would say, with regard to people that are asking what Charles Murray would be in our system of nobility, on the one hand, he would be based because of his book, the Bell Curve, but then the more recent book is, unfortunately, I would say, a little bit purple-pilled. Because it holds back on the more up-to-date kind of a more interesting research on IQ and various naughty things, and so he would therefore perhaps have to be demoted to the purple pill, Charles Murray. Certainly, maybe we can make a compromise and call him the red pilled Charles Murray on the basis of his previous work.
So the former red pilled Charles Murray,
the former red pilled, the now purple pilled Charles Murray. I mean, that's any system of nobility. I mean, the ad fontes, the college of arms of the system can, of course, demote you and whatever and declare you no longer a gentleman. So yes, and so what else have you been thinking about? We were talking about these retractions, and before the show started, and we were talking about this thing on endometriosis. And anyway, what else has been tickling your?
Yeah, there was the whole retraction thing seems to be, well, I guess that is a new way we can measure basedness. I mean, you can just have a high score of how many of your papers they've tried or succeeded in retracting. Because of course, retraction, scientifically speaking, used to be about kind of cleaning the permanent scientific record of something that was definitely false, or at least like highly unlikely to represent something real. Mostly fraudulent data. Someone made it up, and later they figured out that this data probably didn't exist. And or like you did a coding error in your analysis, and you turned out your results were actually the opposite of what you reported. That this actually has happened before. They did like a correction of a paper where, sorry, the conclusion was actually opposite of what we said.
Their conclusion was that they argued that liberal people were nice and conservative people were nasty.
Yes, that's the one, the psychoticness thing, and they did a coding error or something. Yeah, but of course, as you know, nowadays we retractions or corrections, they seem to be more in line with the whole woke thing that we have ongoing, right? Or we had in recent times, we had the Corey Clark et al. Paper, which was kind of purple-pilled, I would say. I mean, it would kind of in line with what you're talking about often on this channel, is that their paper was essentially you take the national IQs and you take religiousness and you take like murder rate over time, and you see whether religion seems to be kind of a buffer against the murder rates, insofar as if when religiousness goes down, then kind of murder rates went up in some countries, but not in ones with high IQ. So it seems like they could kind of compensate for each other. So in that sense, like religion would be kind of a thing that common folks need, or most people need, to kind of help them with crime. That would at least be that was the theory they were advocating.
Saying if you have low IQ and you're religious, then this will prevent you from committing crime because you're religious.
That's right.
If you have high IQ, you don't need the religiousness because you have high IQ, right, and you're altruistic and you have pro-social values. Then even if you're not religious, so
right. Or maybe you're just good at thinking. Like, I mean, for most crimes, if you keep doing them, eventually you'll get caught by the police and get some obnoxious, punishment. And so maybe you can say that higher IQ people, they're not necessarily more moral, and so less interested in doing crime, but they just realize that most of the time crime doesn't pay. It depends what kind of crime, right? But here they're looking at murder, and so most murders are like acquaintance or like killing your spouse or someone you had business fallouts with. And these are the ones the police love because these are the easiest to find, right? All you do is you look for someone who has a plausible motive, and then you travel up the alibis of everybody and then if you find someone who doesn't have an alibi, then it seems likely case. But the difficult murder accounts are the ones, or the murder cases are the ones like random attackers, right? And so those are actually the ones the public is most afraid of, right?
Although it's increasingly it's increasingly so difficult to get away with murder because since the late 80s and the advance of DNA and whatever, it's so hard. So they haven't got a fighting chance really now. But in terms of what people are commenting on the baseness. No, I'm going to think about this. I'm going to think about it carefully. I'm going to codify it. And I'm going to come up with a way in a very autistic kind of way. And I'm going to, because you had these autistics that were obsessed with heraldry. It's an interesting thing. Asperger himself commented that he had one of his patients was this autistic that was obsessed with heraldry. There's something attractive about it because it's to do with power, I suppose. And autistics are masculinized, sort of power oriented.
Well, I'm sure there is one other normal host of this chat who's normally very much into flags and heraldry and all these things. So I guess your pattern fits. There was one guy in Mankind Quarterly who looked at all the flags, and you can kind of code national flags of whether they have like the Christian cross or the Muslim crescent moon thing and which colors are on the flags, and you can relate it to the national IQs of these countries. And he showed that this seems to be kind of a decent predictor. Although, it's kind of obvious because if you look at the ones with this Christian cross, those are all like these weirdo Nordic, not very Christian countries nowadays. So you get like the strange result that having a cross on your flag predicts not being Christian. I guess not too much Christian.
Yeah, I think that would be a problem. So remember, you can, of course, send super chats if you want to. I've received various super chats from you so far. And also, I would note that Emil has his own channel. Which you can subscribe to. I invited Emil if he wanted to just put his stuff on my channel, which of course has almost 40,000 viewers. But Emil 40,000 subscribers. But Emil is so autistic that he just and anal that he decided no, he wants to keep his own and separate.
It's because I don't want to be seen with low likes like you.
No, that's true. You don't want to be seen with people that are merely right-based. It's only the most based people that have offended a huge. Although I was in a recent Hope Not Hate report. I think that's pretty based.
I see. But did you get like singled out, or did you only get like the passing mention thing?
Oh, I got on the first one. I got singled out just about me, and then in the second one, just a passing mention how I'm a pseudoscientist, which I'm proud. I'm proud that people.
But Hope Not Hate. That's the that's Ben van der Merwe, right? That's the Jewish South African journalist kind of guy who's been harassing us for a while. You know that?
Public school boy. Yes, I believe so. That's right. Yeah, very wealthy person from very wealthy.
There was someone who wrote a funny life take on him. I think that was a Lance Welton or whatever that guy is.
Leader. Yeah. That's right. And it showed that he's a public school boy, very, very rich, never wanted for anything in his life. And goes around condemning working class people because those people want to help out their country and want to.
That seems to be a common pattern. We had there were some cases in Denmark about the commie party. They're called the unity lists, and the reason they're called that is because all the Marxists, of course, they can't agree. You have the Leninist Marxist and the normal Marxist and the Maoists and the whatever random other Marxist kind of people. And they had all this through the 80s and 70s. They were all in this inter-fighting and so on, right? But then they finally, unfortunately, united. Now they had the unity lists. And so there were some of these people who were on this unity list, and they were having headlines about how they were saying one thing on the media, inequality bad. And then they were also living in very expensive apartments bought by their parents in inner Copenhagen, of course. So
of course.
It's just, of course. I mean, every time, right?
I did a video on this the other day, and there was a very interesting paper on it by somebody with some peculiar name, Ock et al. And he showed that the people that are virtue signaling correlated with dark triad traits, which make complete sense, of course, because if I looked at this on my video on the other day, the dark triad traits, you are Machiavellian, so you want power, and you realize you can get power by manipulating other people into thinking you're virtuous, because we're evolved to like virtuous people, because we're a eusocial species. You are narcissistic, so you feel you're entitled to power, you should have power, you deserve money, you deserve other people's resources, and you're just a cheat, basically. You're a psychopath, and so you're happy to just basically lie to people and say, oh God, look how virtuous I am, and then live in your parents' massive house in Paris.
There was a great example of this one recently. There was that, do you see that story? It was, I think, between the last time I was here. It was the one where this white fat woman, who's some academic, who already got thrown out of something for doing some Me Too kind of thing that kind of backfired on her because she was making stuff up too much. But what she had done is that she had made like a Native American Twitter account for some a non-existent Native American professor, and then she's been tweeting from this Native American, for a while. So it had like, I don't know, thousands, but yeah, probably thousands of followers. And then during the COVID crisis, she announced that this fictitious Native American academic had now died. And she wrote this very long eulogy from her own account. It was really hilarious. And what the funny thing was, like, there were some other social justice people. They saw this like eulogy that got like hundreds of retweets, right? And so they saw it, and they looked at the university website, and they go to the university website. It's like, why don't they have a eulogy on the website for this fictitious Native American person? And that's when they started digging. And of course, they contact the university, and they say, we've never heard of this person, right? And so that's when they figured out it's the figment of imagination of this, white woman. And then that's the only way she got found out, by doing this fake eulogy.
They're not there. They have form, as I believe it's known, these left-wing academics, in making up Native Americans, because, of course, there was the case of Carlos Castaneda, who's, I don't know if you've heard of him. He was an anthropologist in the 60s, and he basically just falsified his entire doctoral thesis. And he said that, he went out to do research on some Native American group, and he got to know this shaman, and this shaman initiated him, and he had all these amazing visions that challenged the ontological blah, 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 blah. And basically, he just made it all up. And it was discovered that he'd found out old theses and just sort of taken ideas from there and developed it into a sort of like a story, really, into like a novel, a fantasy, from his own personal perspective. And he just submitted that as the thesis. And then he became really, really famous on the back of it. And it was a really, really famous book. And then, of course, it all transpired that it was just a fantasy. He was just on drugs, basically, and he was just a novel that he just made up. So it sounds
kind of like the Margaret Mead, right? There was a similar controversy with her.
Right, yeah. She spoke to a group of young girls, basically, and they just thought she asked them about sex and masturbation and whatever. And they thought, this is in the 20s, and they thought it was hilarious, and just lied and made stuff up and just said, oh yeah, we have sex all the time. We have sex with loads of blokes. And she just wrote it all down. Oh yeah. And then of course she didn't want to, being a sensitive and not very good looking woman. She didn't want to live among them because that was hard work. Too many flies and things. So she lived in the naval base on the island on Samoa. Didn't really learn the language, didn't really understand what was going on, and came up with this field work that was nonsense, that it was just this paradise, nothing bad happened and whatever. And then 20 years later, this disciple of hers called Derek Freeman, who was himself a nutter, anyway, did his own
He was
field
also
work.
a nutter, I don't know. Yeah.
He was a nutter. But anyway, he tracked down these women that were now elderly, who'd been spoken to in the 20s. They were like, yeah, we just talk bollocks. Just made it.
I mean, suppose you're kind of an old tribe, and you are living out in the actual real life, and you're having to do with all these flies and hunting and all this stuff. And here comes this weird Western white-skinned woman, and all she wants to talk about is about how all these weird sexual things. And you're like, is this woman for real, right? I mean, if you apply a little bit of a theory of mind here, you would see that why should these random tribes people take this random foreigner too seriously? Why would they not feed her a bunch of random stuff? So that seems to be, I mean, suppose you were a random tribes person, I would totally do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the advantage of the only field work I've done is with fundamentalist Christians, and they have a very, very strong, also Finns, but they have the fundamentalist Christians, and the Finns actually have a very, very strong propensity towards, telling the truth and whatever. And so with there, it's perhaps okay. But yeah, if it's you going to the Yanomamo and whatever, A, why should they be cooperative with you? B, why should they tell you the truth? And C, bollocks, basically. I mean, there isn't a C because the A and the B were so great. And so I don't know. It's such a subjective science. It's so open to corruption.
Right. So the whole qualitative stuff. Of course, you actually did a degree in some more qualitative stuff than me, but I actually did in linguistics. They do introduce you to all this qualitative stuff, and they actually don't teach you statistics. So you have to read all these papers, and you don't really have any qualifications if you're kind of a standard linguistic student. I taught myself all that sort of aside. But in qualitative research, they have all these. They have tons of books about that, and they publish new ones every year because there's so many people going through these qualitative fields, and so they get like 1 billion citations, and so that's how you get more money, right? And you have write a new college textbook on qualitative methods or something, but more or less they have a few of these different ones like participant observation or these sort of things. So participant observation is like you go there and you just like you become one with the tribe or one with the if you want to learn about Native Americans, well, you go there and you live like a Native American. You don't go there and just ask them about stuff. You kind of go there and you say, I come from far away. I want to join your tribe for 6 months or some years sometimes. And then you just kind of live there, and then eventually you leave. And so that's how they used to do these fascinating studies, where they actually went to some like the Navarro tribe or something, right? And there was the people who went there and just kind of lived with them. So it's more like Dances with Wolves or these kind of fictionalized accounts of that stuff. But nowadays, it's totally not like that, right?
No, it's not. And also, they're not researching things like that. They're just researching stuff that upper middle class girls with rich parents like.
Stuff white people like, yes.
Yeah, like I've been to these conferences before. You wouldn't believe the crap. I mean, there was one girl, and her field work was that she's from Sicily, so she was at a British university, but she was Sicilian, and so she went to this market in some town in Sicily and just watched it. That was her. What's the point of that? And she looked at the dynamics of the bar. And there was another guy, the most extreme example ever was a British guy working at some Canadian university, and his field work was spending a lot of time with one bear hunter.
I see. But even these people seem extremely scientific by the even modern standards. I don't know if you've been following, of course, for years, the Twitter account Real Peer Review, which always posts tons of this stuff. And it posted all these weirdo qualitative pseudoscience before it kind of became super woke and mainstream now. And so what they have is that they used to do the stuff where you go to a tribe, or at least you go to the local supermarket, or something like that. But now they don't really do that. They just do auto what is they call it? Auto ethnography, right? That's where you just report anecdotes from your own life, right? You don't even bother going to someone else and watch the market. No, you just write down some random stuff from your own life.
You don't believe in where is that book now? You don't believe in truth. There's a particular book I've got which was a good example of this. I don't know where it's gone. But you don't believe in truth. There's no such thing as objective truth, and so consequently, all you're doing is presenting your own personal perspective on. Right. Therefore, the nature of you and the fact that your father used to shout at you when you were a child, or your mother did.
Yes, of course. So everybody else is wondering why the fuck should we read this stuff if there's no truth? Then exactly what are you reporting? Private truths?
It's just like opinion writing. It's just like, it's not even investigative journalism. It just becomes your own subjective opinion about some stuff, which is built up with your own. Right. You literally get theses now. It's like there was one in
dissertations, right? So
Danish woman at the University of Aberdeen. She was, what was her name? I can't remember her name. But it was basically, her argument was, I am a Greenlandic woman, and because I'm a Greenlandic woman, I have some special gnosis about the nature of Greenlandic people, and this is my opinion about Greenlandic people, and that's it. I see, yeah.
And there's some people who've even toppled this one, because there's kind of a race to the bottom of being the least scientific or the most pseudo, and there are some people who beat even the auto ethnobiography or whatever they call that stuff. And so what these people have done is that they're actually reporting dreams now. So it's not even anecdotes for your own life. It's actually fictional since it's something you just dreamt. So I guess I don't know how it is you want to top stuff
this book I reviewed years ago. Anthropological fieldwork, a relational process. Right. Yes. Now, what does a relational process actually mean? It means, so it's got chapters like in the field, intersubjectivity, empathy, and the workings of internalized presence. I mean, you can't make this up. Emotions in and out of a mediation retreat, mixed emotions about Barbie's nose, narratives against despair, being a hostage to the other, Levinas's ethical epistemology and dysphoric fieldwork experiences, emotions interpretation and my psychoanalytic countertransference. I mean, geez. Anyway, let's turn to some real science, which is the question which you have so far been sending in, super chats. And if you want, again, please do. I would say at this stage, please do subscribe. This channel, as you know, is being absolutely throttled by the forces of evil. And so please do subscribe. Please do subscribe on BitChute as well, where I can put absolutely everything. Please subscribe to Emil's channel as well, which you will find quite easily in YouTube. Remember that we live stream on Mondays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. UK time, 2 p.m. New York. You want to send in the and we're most grateful for your super chats and support for our work, and I will turn to one now, which is from Gamer Games, £20. Thank you very much indeed, sir. And he says, a donation for Ed Dutton, which I hope he will put towards buying the new Call of Duty game, which is is very based on the history of Soviet subversion. I hope you will watch the trailer. The game will red pill Zoomers. Okay, well, thank you very much, sir. I've never heard of the game Call of Duty, and I certainly was, as you know, I only play Grand Theft Auto 5 and no other games. And now
it does have a kind of Christian name, right? Call of Duty is like duties being called upon you and so on.
Yeah, the call of your duty is calling you. So there's something quite religious about that. Have you played Call of Duty, Emil?
I don't know. I think maybe I played Call of Duty 1 or 2, but that's so many years ago. I was at like some LAN party or something. I haven't played any of the newer ones because they were too boring. Some years ago, I was playing too much computer games, and that wasn't very useful. And so I convinced myself that playing computer games isn't doing your duty to science. And so I sold my graphics card, and I uninstalled Windows and installed Linux. And so then you can't really play anything. And then I became infamous on the internet instead. And so I'll tell my kids when they grow up, I'll have to tell them that you shouldn't uninstall your computer games, because then you get a RatWiki page and you see how things get from there. Right?
But then, of course, you become the most based Emil Kirkegaard, and you can put the letters Ratwick after your name.
I see, yeah.
Page. That is. I will have a look into that, sir, and I will see. I will look at the video online about it anyway. But I'm not. No, I like this GTA 5 thing. It's very realistic. I don't drive a car in real life. I had a terrible bicycle crash the other day. I cycled quite a long way from Oulu to Kemperley. And then on the way back, I was going down this underpass to go under the road, and I lost control of the bike. But finished bikes don't have brakes on the front. They only have brakes by cycling backwards. And my feet came off the pedals, and I couldn't get them back on in time. And I realised that I've got no cycle helmet on. If I crash into this wall that I'm going towards, I could get seriously injured. So I had to kind of make a turn and throw myself into a ditch, and the ditch had nettles in it, and I was stung. And it was extremely unpleasant. And I've now got very, very substantial bruises. But otherwise, but that doesn't happen in GTA 5 because, of course, you're
not very often, at least.
Not very often, no. Right, wow, £2. Thank you very much. It says, what do you think of stereotype threat? Okay, well, I'll Emil's the technical person here, so I'll let Emil answer that.
The technical non-hermit, yes. So stereotype threat kind of dates back very long time ago to a time before time began, as they used to say. A time before they called it stereotype threat, and the very idea is that you have these stereotypes of some group of persons, whether it's ethnic groups, races, religious people, any other random group of people you can think of. And so when you give them some kind of a questionnaire or a test or something, they have a sort of tendency to behave in line with whatever group it is that they belong to, and whatever it is the social stereotype is about that group. So it's kind of a group conformism creates group differences sort of social psychology take. So it's gone under many names, but I think in the 90s they started calling this stereotype threat now, because now apparently it's only something that can make you different from white people, and kind of it's a threat, whereas before it was seen kind of a more neutral thing. And so in the 90s, they did these small studies, and they showed that, well, theoretically, according to them, they showed that you give people you mentioned something like black people don't tend to do well in IQ tests, and then you give people an IQ test immediately afterwards. And then this supposedly lowers the scores a little bit. And so the theory is that the stereotypes are actually creating reality, not reality the stereotypes. And so this, of course, expanded. Then you have thousands of these studies about everything you can think of: immigrants, groups, sex difference in mathematics ability, anything you can possibly imagine. And there's like a massive cottage industry of doing these studies.
And then they found huge publication bias. So the studies that don't replicate it are not published. The studies that do replicate it are published. You've got small effect sizes. You've got studies that show the opposite, so that if you prime somebody to think that black people are bad IQ test, they do surprisingly better than they otherwise would have done. Tried women to think women are bad at IQ tests, they do better than they otherwise would have done. And so basically, there was a big paper on this a couple of years ago. The whole thing is just bollocks.
But it's very convenient, right? I think various U.S. presidents has been quoting the stereotype as being an established effect and so on. So of course, after the 2011, you kind of started having this replication crisis in science, and people were wondering, so the stuff they used to tell us that was based on like similar small scale studies, maybe that stuff ain't true, right? Maybe it's really just, it is telling us something. It's telling us what the collective biases is of psychologists, which of course is informative as well, but it's different than what they were reporting on, right? And so in 2015, there was like a big meta-analysis of the stereotype threat stuff for women and math ability, and it found that exactly as you're saying, like things seem to be not quite what they're saying, right? There seems to be a lot of studies missing. And then Jelte Wickerts, in the Dutch fashioned names, I guess you would call him purple-pilled, at least publicly speaking. And he did a meta-analysis like on the same way, but for African-American IQ thing. That's the one they really want to stick to, right? And he showed that there's tons of publication bias in this, but he only presented it as a talk on a conference at ICER in 2012 or something.
He didn't publish it. No, so
he never published it. And I've emailed him like 5 times to tell me, so Jelte, where's this paper, right? And so he won't do it out. But I found a copy of I couldn't find a copy of the slides because apparently only he has them. But I have a copy of the abstract from the conference. So I put that on my blog. I guess he'll be purple-pilled.
Purple-pilled Jelte Wickerts. Yeah, he's an interesting chap, Jelte Wickerts. He's basically leftist, but he's very anal about sort of scientific truth in a weird way as well.
Right. So I enjoy his work a lot, but he seems to move it away from kind of normal IQ research now. He's mostly doing this meta-science thing, which I think is super helpful because maybe readers don't know, but there's this guy, Nevin Cesardic, a Croatian philosopher, and he came up with this hypothesis, or the conjecture is that because you have the scientific system, it's overrun by left-wing people, and so there is a bias in findings against things that would be anti-left, not necessarily pro-conservative, but just like anti-left, right? Stuff that's against the left-wing they don't like. So if you submit a paper with this, you're going to get more harsh critique in the reviews, and the editor is more likely to just reject it and all this stuff. So a lot of stuff hasn't really been proved. But if you just do kind of the logic of this systemic bias, right? You're talking about systemic biases a lot of these days. So systemic leftism is what science has, right? And so what you'd expect from systemic leftism in science is that because of the greater criticism against anti-left findings, the ones that are anti-left that somehow make it through, they must be really good, right? So you'd actually expect a correlation between anti-left science and being higher quality if you measure it objectively speaking.
So I should be very pleased with my new paper on transsexuality, because even I can't believe that made it through. I couldn't believe. At one point, they went back and said, "No, we just suddenly announced we're not going to publish it." And we wrote, "We haven't responded correctly to the peer reviews," and we wrote to them in detail and said, "What bollocks we have." Thank you, Wiki RS, for your donation, for your question. And then they just changed their minds and published it, and it's already got some hit back from some mutant.
Yeah, I'm sure you will get a nice editor get denounced very soon. There was
looking forward to it.
Yeah, so anyway, so the Cesardic thing, so he's basically predicting there should be this relationship. And later, I think it was one of Jelte's students, now we're talking about the purple pill Jelte, but I think Jelte has hidden power levels, and you'll see. And so, for instance, he had one PhD student, and he gave her the task of doing a big replication of the stereotype threat for women and math ability. And so they had like 2,000 Dutch high school students take part in this like pre-registered study. Like it's unattackable, right? And pre-registered, nice math test, and you use the same materials as the promoters of stereotype threat are saying. And so they did this with these 2,000 Dutch students, and they found absolutely fucking nothing, right? There's just nothing there. This effect was just not real, right? So you see, Jelte is not putting this stuff out on his real name per se, because he's letting a woman be the first author, right? Jelte could probably predict what the results of this would be, right? It's very obvious if you know anything about skeptical science, right?
So the purple pill rather than the red pill. I've got to move on. Eid Wolf, €5 says boycott Goodyear. I don't know what that's a reference to. I imagine Goodyear tires have done something silly that I don't drive cars, so I don't care about. I always say that driving around motor cars is the height of ignorance. Do you drive, Emil? Can you drive?
No, I don't even have a driver's license.
No, neither do I. No, neither.
I guess we should do a survey and see what correlates, aside from being a soy boy, with not having a driver's license.
I think doing intelligence research seems to correlate with not having a driver's license.
Or living in a big city, right? So.
Emil Kirkegaard, 20 Danish kroner, says, when will I get back on the show? Well, I can answer that one for you, Emil. It is Monday at 7 p.m. UK time, 8 p.m. Danish time, and we're very glad to have you. Ryan Ravenscroft, £5, says nothing at all. Thank you very much, sir. Ryan Ravenscroft, for the £5, says, have you read the short story The Marching Morons by Cyril M. Cornbluth, the grandfather of idiocracy? No, as a rule, sir, I don't read made-up stuff. In fact, one of the only made-up things that I quite like is this book, 253 by Jeff Ryman, which is about a British underground train, tube train in 1994 in January, which is ideally filled. That is to say, no one is standing up, and that is 252 people plus the driver, and each of them are described in 253 words with regard to what they look like, inside information, and what they're doing or thinking. Although I did discover that there's a mistake in it, and one of them is actually described in 252 words or something. But anyway, I think that's very, very good. I don't generally read fiction. Are you familiar with the story, Emil?
I've heard of it, but only like memes and stuff. I also don't read fiction, as I think I think reading fiction, if you take the ratio of fiction to non-fiction, or say the fiction percent of what you've read, I think that's probably a pretty good indicator of kind of a masculinity or testosterone in reading habits. I bet it will correlate with autism as well. I'm pretty sure there is a website with like you can do one of those vocabulary test things, and they all ask you how many books you kind of read and what kind of the distribution of those is. And I noted that people who read more fiction have higher vocabulary scores, even holding the number of books constant. And so I think is that fiction exposes you to tons of these weird adjectives and so on, right? That describe people in 100 different ways that mean the same thing. And so you kind of make your vocabulary score goes up. That would be one take. The other option is that people who read fiction are self-selected because they're very much into, they're interested in human traits and so on. And so they already had higher verbal tilts to begin with. So unfortunately, I haven't seen any more study on this. But
I can't sort about with fiction. It's
too boring.
It's too boring. I could just read some cultural anthropology if I want some fiction. Right. Clifford Bates, 25 Polish zloty. Thank you very much indeed, sir. And he says, check out Larry Arnhart's The Biological Sociology of the Good Society in today's post at Law and Liberty blog. Review of Christakis 2019 book. Okay, sir, thank you. I shall have a look at that. Fransworth Possum Socks 9.99 says nothing. Thank you very much, sir. Fransworth Possum Socks 4.99 says, Ed, what is best in life? What is best in life? Well,
it's going to be a long answer. I'll just lean back and come on, priest, give me your wisdom.
I really like a nice Nepalese meal. I went for a Nepalese meal on Saturday with the Brits in Olu group. Which we have here, and it was lovely. It was a really nice Nepalese meal. Is currently one of the best things in my life. That one, and two, when, as has recently happened, I have an idea for a new book, and I really get into it, and I can just sort of see the way it's going to flow, and I can just see how it's going to work, and I can see. Somehow I just sort of can see everything about it, and
you have a mental collection of bad studies to put into it.
Yeah, and yes, precisely. And then when you realize how it all works and it all comes into place, and I'm in that phase now where tomorrow I'm just going to get up and I'm just going to write.
So what is a Nepalese meal for someone who hasn't been to Nepal? The only thing I know about Nepal is that there was a large randomized trial in Nepal where they gave this like the whole multivitamin to boost IQs, and so I think there's 11-year follow-up where they had pregnant women, they gave them these multivitamins, and then they waited 11 years to measure the kids on the IQ test, and they didn't really find any difference. So I think it's the largest of these trials that found basically nothing, even in Nepal, which is I think that was kind of surprising because Nepal has like an IQ of, I don't know, 78 or like 80 or something close to that, right? So if multivitamins doesn't boost your IQ, at least giving them to pregnant women, then what hope do we have of fixing ethnic gaps with multivitamins or some other random stuff like that in Western countries. There's zero, right?
Zero. Presley Moon says, "What is your new book about?" or something. What's your new book? I'm not going to say, but it's going to be very much of a white pill, madam. It'll be a white pill. Yes. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the old Nepalese food. I much prefer it to, because when I was a kid, it was Bangladeshi food we had in the UK, and I still like that. I miss that. They call it Indian food, but Bangladesh.
But what is the difference then, Ed? Can you enlighten us?
Nepalese food and sorry.
What is the difference between the Nepalese food and the Indian food and the Bangladeshi food?
It's much spicier. They haven't dumbed it down yet. So that's one thing that happened. These Indian restaurants in the UK have dumbed down the food, if you like. They've blanded it down for the English palate. And the Nepalese reckon they've done that as well for the Finns. But even so, it's bloody spicy. So it's much spicier, and it's just a much more interesting mix of spices. And I really like it. It's really good stuff. So I would say getting an idea for research, and it's just flowing, and you're in the zone and just doing it. That's great, and you're just there. And I haven't had that for a long time. Not that feeling of totally. Not since I wrote my biography of Herbert Sneyd Kinnersley, and it was a couple of years ago. And then secondly, as I said, Nepalese food. Okay, the next question comes from Gabriel R, and he says, "Are unaccomplished geniuses just smart, awkward guys? I'm assuming there are many potential geniuses trapped in our modern career rat race." Are unaccomplished geniuses? So, I'm not sure.
Well, that's a contradiction, right?
Yeah,
unaccomplished. Yeah. That's not possible. You define genius as having, significant, magnificent, even creative achievement, right? So, an unaccomplished genius, that's kind of a contradiction. But only, I guess, you could say someone who later in life would be classified as a genius for something they're going to do later, that would earlier in their life be at that point an unaccomplished genius. So I guess not entirely a contradiction, but kind of close to it.
Well, no, because wouldn't they? If that was the case, then wouldn't they? They wouldn't be an unaccomplished genius. They'd be a future genius.
Yeah, you could say like that. It depends on the semantics, right? But
I see unaccomplished genius as a person that has some of the genius trait, as perhaps in many ways the flip side of genius. So what is genius? It's outlier high. It's this optimum relationship between outlier, well, in the case of science anyway, outlier high IQ plus these traits such as moderately low agreeableness, moderately low conscientiousness, perhaps an element of neuroticism, and whatever, and they're just optimum. And when that person is put in Woodley reckons that the environment shouldn't matter and they'll always pull through, but I'm not sure about that. I think some environments
there are some studies in that
with other clever people and whatever. Yeah, and there are also studies on how they should have like bad backgrounds, like their fathers should walk out on them. And
like, for instance, I think that if you put some geniuses in like East Asian society, they would shine through less, because East Asian society is not conducive to like extreme individual differences, right?
No, they would.
They're too collectivist, right? If the grass that sticks up gets cut down and this sort of thing, right?
That's right. And the only geniuses, if you count Nobel prizes and things as geniuses that Finland's ever produced, have left Finland.
They also are substantially Swedish, right?
They're also mainly Swedish-speaking Finns. I think that's for genetic reasons, because of the higher levels of autism and lower levels of schizophrenia among Swedish-speaking Finns.
What is it with the schizo thing, right? Because if you look at creative achievement, there's a lot of people who have like, they're not themselves schizophrenic, but they often have like second-degree relatives who are schizo. Right?
They have relatives that are. So there's a schizotype scale, and if you are at optimum on that, then you're quite high in openness, and therefore you're kind of artistic. But if you're too high, then you're schizophrenic and you're mad and you're useless. And so therefore they have relatives, particularly people like poets and things, who are like maybe. Right. Relatives who are schizophrenic, but they're not themselves schizophrenic. But we found this study I did with Guy and Dimitri that it's negative. The national per capita schizophrenia level is negatively associated with with national per capita genius when you control roughly for intelligence, and autism positively. And this is probably because what autism involves is you don't really care about people's feelings and shit, and you're basically you're masculinized basically. And although it's called common among men, because of greater male diversity and stuff, they are more feminized. So anyway, look, the point is that with regard to the gentleman's very, very interesting question, I think that the flip you're going to get as a consequence of genius, you're going to get these people that don't quite have the right factors because they're right. Too high, they're too low in agreeableness, maybe like J. Philippe Rushton, or or they're not quite intelligent enough, or they're too slightly too high in conscientiousness and
too lazy, right? Because you have to have to be a genius. You kind of have to have the split conscientiousness trait, right? There's a lot of talk about the Big Five and so on, but Big Five is in many ways kind of a too rough way to kind of put personality, right? It actually doesn't replicate that well in larger studies of more items. But anyway, with regards to genius, you could say, for instance, the conscientiousness is often think of as a kind of a work ethic and so on. But it's also it has like rule following tendencies, right? But you see, if you have to be a genius, you have to break with whatever the status quo is, right?
Yeah,
so you can't really be someone who's
they're moderately low in it. Geniuses, but so these are unaccomplished geniuses
still having high work effort, right?
Still having a high work.
So they have so that's what I meant with they have an unclean conscientiousness profile with like high work ethic and low like rule following.
An uneven intelligence profile as well, like very high in G, I suppose, and very very low in some other things like ability to drive. So it
seems that verbal tilt is related to genius, no?
It could be. So anyway, the point is that you're going to get these unaccomplished geniuses. I suppose you're thinking of people that are that are creative and original, but not very bright. That's kind of an unaccomplished genius, or who are extremely intelligent but that they lack the personality, and therefore they're too conscientious, too agreeable, and they just spend their time slotting about with card games or heraldry or something.
So they optimize page click-through rates at Google, right? They're very good at it.
And so these would be these kind of academics. There are some who are academics who are what we would call purple-pilled or red-pilled, who just don't dare go the full based, don't dare, let alone the right based and most based, and therefore don't ascend to the very top. So I think that would be my.
I do have a question for you on that. Given that we do have the hierarchy, I forgot who's the most based right now, according to the Noah Carl study. So my question is, how do you plan to improve your ranking in the base department in your next book?
Well, my next book is called Making Sense of Race.
I see, yeah, it's going to help.
That's not the one I'm talking about that I'm currently doing. That's the one I'm just finishing now. So I think that's going to help. And then my book after that is called Feminism, Witches, and the Fall of the Rest, which argues that feminists are modern-day witches. It argues like really turgid.
Is that the 2D, 4D sort of thing?
That stuff and other stuff as well. So yeah, so that I think that could also help. So yeah, I think I'm going to be. I should be okay on the basis.
Maybe you should just as a PR move, you should just email Oliver Smith, the RatWiki guy, and you can say you can feed him some info about your new book, and he can. Have you seen on page 205? There's this quote of the study that you don't like, and I suggest you put this right in my RatWiki right this moment.
I will. I shall get in touch with him, Oliver. If you're watching. Of course you're watching. Of course.
I was probably watching.
I will because your nemesis is on here. Okay. Francis Madden 799. Thank you very much indeed, sir. Francis Madden 799. Thank you very much indeed, sir. Says stress, poverty, environmental pressure to survive in harsh conditions can drop IQ up to 15 points. I don't know if that's right. Perhaps Emil will be able to comment on that. What role does it have in reducing African IQ?
So. Yeah, I will try. So the stress and so on, it's kind of difficult to kind of measure well because you don't really have a camera that follows some person through their entire lives. But there was a recent very informative study in that they looked at various kids who had been through court cases, and so there was actually kind of objective third-party evidence about how much hardship they'd actually suffered, and got beaten by their parents or bullied in school, this sort of thing, right? And the same people, they had self-report on their on getting harassed in life, basically getting stressful life experiences, bullying in school, the same things they had actually objective data about. And then they looked at the future, and so does self-reporting problems or objective records of problems, does that predict the future well-being best or kind of future mental illness problems? And they found that actually self-reporting problems predicts the future ones problems much better than actual objective stress in life. And so what it seems to be the case that the people who are whining very much about how they were bullied in school and all that stuff, these are basically people who are just high neuroticism, and they have like a low threshold for when they will describe something as bullying, whereas as a more well-adjusted person would be more likely to just kind of endure. Like, okay, you get some bullying, but then you get 5 friends in school, and then you bully them back, and then it stops, right? And then 5 years later, you kind of forgot about it. You have to be kind of a special sort of neurotic person to once you're like a well-known person, like still complain about how you're bullying in school, like the what's her name, Angela Saini, right? She was writing one of these books. Was it Inferior, Superior, one of the other ones? I guess I don't know what the next title will be, but one of these books, has the introduction. She's complaining about how she was bullied in school for being Indian or something, right? So what that really tells us about is not really how much she was actually bullied, although she probably was bullied, but more that how fragile her ego is, right? So that's a bit far away from the African IQ effect, but it does give you kind of a the priors that maybe it's not so much objective hardships that relate to these outcomes. Sometimes it's more the subjective effect. With regards to the IQ effect of stress and food and all this stuff, I'm sure there is some effect, but it's very difficult to find out. How exactly would you find out? We can look at Africans who go to different countries, and they seem to have quite similar IQs to Africans. Maybe not exactly the same. So there's some kind of environmental gain. But that could also be because of selective migration, right? In Denmark, we had data from the army, right? The army IQ test in Denmark, and I was able to get the average IQ score by first name. And so there's a bunch of these like Mohammed names, and one of the Mohammed names is spelled in an unusual way. I think it's the one with one M and the A, so Muhammad. And as I recall, if you check that one, that's the one that comes from Somalia. So this one is a Somali IQ in Denmark, at least for the ones called Muhammad. And that one was in the 70s, even in Denmark. And so that's for people who take the Danish army test. And so that's not just a random immigrant. If you're someone who came after turning 18, right? If you're some recent immigrant, you wouldn't be taking the Danish army test. I think that's only for citizens, or at the very least people who have residence permits. So not just kind of recent immigrants. So probably these are second generation Somalis who still score like a mean IQ of 76 or something. So how much environmental gain can there really be there? I don't really know, but not too much. I guess you're silent now.
Sorry, the research by Davide indicated as well this strong correlation between the genetics of alleles associated with very high education and the average IQ scores of these places.
That's right.
So I think it's unlikely that the environment is going to have much of an effect. And adoption studies as well that we have, and we know that the African American average IQ is 85, and if they get adopted by very, very, very middle class white people that probably have an IQ of 120, then the average IQ becomes 89. So there's in adulthood.
Maybe.
So
that's in that study is from Minnesota, right, or Wisconsin is one of those. But actually, the African IQ up there is about 89 or so. So they didn't really gain anything from that being adopted.
Of course, no, I forgot about that. Yeah, it's in the south it's 80, in the north it's 90.
Roughly about that, yeah. So you can say that if you look at the American states, you get kind of a mixture ancestry effect as well. Because if you look at blacks in, say, not Minnesota, but blacks in Mississippi, they're quite a bit more African than the blacks who are now in Seattle. Because you kind of, how do you get to Seattle if you're in Mississippi? Well, you have to travel all the way through the America. And so what happened is that after the Civil War, you had a bunch of blacks who kind of migrated north, the Great Migration, black thing, and that was there's evidence saying that this is selective migration for intelligence and wealth and so on, right? And that of course means that the ones who are migrating north will also be more European on average, right? Basically a mixture. And 23andMe has been so nice to actually publish data on this. They have millions of people in America who have entry tests, and they published the African percentage by state of the people who are customers of 23andMe, right? And so if you take that data and you correlate it with the black IQ by state, you get a positive relationship, just as you'd expect, right? So I expect a lot more of this work in the future. So that's one way.
Okay, I should say to those that are watching that we will please remember to subscribe to the channel. Please remember to subscribe to Emil's channel, and when I take this down when it's finished, and I put it on BitChute. So please, please subscribe there. Now the next question comes from, oh my God, yes, here we go. From Mark, £5, and thank you very much indeed, sir. He says, "Hi Ed, big fan. Do you think we are on the cusp of a right-wing revolution, the fact in history, meaning a new realism and logic-based world order?" I don't know about a logic-based world order, but I think that based on the research by Turkin, he predicts that, seemingly correctly, that the 2020s is going to be a period of substantial disorder and polarization and whatever. And if you look at who is breeding, then it is people that are right-wing who are breeding more than people who are left-wing. And the future belongs to those that turn up. And
that's right.
are people who are right-wing and people who are religious, and those two things quite heavily cross over. And so the heritability of being religious is about 0.4, something like that. The heritability of political orientation is 0.5, 0.6, something like that. We're talking about a 4% increase, something like that, per generation in being right-wing. And think what that does to the tail. This has probably been happening since the 60s. We know that it wasn't happening in the 50s, that in the 50s we were still a religious society. And so what I think has happened is that you have this rise of mutation and deviation from normal selection pressures and whatever. You then have this, you then have the spiteful mutant type people that push people in a maladaptive direction. And so all of the people that are subject to environment, that can be easily environmentally influenced to do something maladaptive, will do it. And so all you're left with is people breeding who are very, very, very unable to be influenced by maladaptive ideas, i.e. the kind of people that were breeding in 1800. That's all that's left. There's no, and those people will tend to be religious and they will tend to be right-wing. And so I think that eventually what will happen is that the academics that run the universities, they won't reproduce themselves. And,
well, that's of course in the far long term, right? So, but if you think in a typically, so you'd say, okay, the long-term prediction here is that we're getting more right-wing, just like currently the long-term prediction has been, for 100 years that we're getting stupider, right? The IQ scores kind of go up, and okay, maybe that's mostly kind of weirdo test bias or like specialized abilities, is the whole Michael Woodley stuff, but the Durer-Cohen's model stuff, right? But for religiousness and this sort of thing, okay, it should go up, but we seem with this pattern, this breeding pattern with the religiousness and so on, it's been there for decades, I should say, maybe at least since the 1960s. But it's unusually strong now. If you look at the, I think, what is it called? The General Social Survey, representative survey of Americans. If you look at people who are very conservative now and very liberal, I think the conservative people are having twice as many kids. So that's the differential is much, the selection for being conservative is much stronger now than it has been. But still, that will take like many decades. So if you're predicting kind of a right-wing kind of takeover now, you'd have to base that on something else than these long-term breeding patterns. So
no, I'm thinking it'll be a gradual process over the next 20 years.
Or 20 years, but I mean, one problem is, of course, people are living so long these days, and so if you're waiting 20 years, so that's the people who are having kids now, you have to wait 20 years for their kids to start voting, or so 18 years, right? And so that takes a very long time.
I'm not sure democracy will survive multiculturalism.
So maybe you want to make some bold predictions. I'm very much a fan of making quantitative predictions.
I just say that based on the research by Tatu Vanden, I think he found that once about 30% of a population, once the population is too genetically diverse, democracy is the first thing that seems to go.
We'll see. We'll see.
Okay, we'll see.
That was kind of similar to what's that guy, Jonathan Haidt, the heterodox guy. He's another purple-pilled person who knows many truths privately, but he never speaks about them. Sometimes he will talk about, what was it, the ethnic gaps in moral ability. I think he was brave enough to write about that in 2011 or something like that. But now he's been very quiet. And basically, there's many of these kind of people who don't have big balls, maybe. And so when the kind of woke censorship goes up, they are now very quiet about things they used to be vocal about. And we've seen a lot of this stuff, even in some of our colleagues now who dare not come to our London conference because they're afraid of, being tagged as evil. I think you can think of a certain person whose name begins with Dimitri, who I'm talking about here. And yeah. But
yes.
I don't know. The pendulum swings to the right.
Which is from Marbly. Thank you very much, madam or sir. And it says, what do you think of the idea that morality religiosity originated with figures with Asperger introvert characteristics? Both of these things require an obsession with truth, rules, and internal mediation. Do you think hermits, prophets, yogis, philosophers? Yeah, I've seen some research by, I think his name's Anthony Storr, and he argues that a lot of these figures had autistic type, people like Moses had autistic type traits. So they were hyper religious. One of the things that predicts being hyper religious is schizophrenia. But one of the things, particularly if you're not that intelligent, that can be associated with being highly religious is autism, because you really want a world that is structured and ordered and that sort of thing. And also, if you're autistic, then you suffer from a great deal of stress and you're hypersensitive to your surroundings and whatever. And this can result in anxiety, which can then result in religious experiences. Intense religious experiences, which will kind of then render you religious in an environment where there's no way of treating things like anxiety. So it's quite possible that these kinds of people that were these great religious figures that came up with these complex religions like St. Paul or whatever would have had autistic obsession traits. So I don't know about introvert, but certainly Asperger traits.
It's related to like system building, right? So like a lot of these Christian like theologies, we have this like kind of Bible. It's a collection of all these different written things that we've tried to collect to the, authentic version based on, the oldest possible surviving or Greek or Aramaic or something, right? And so you have all these books, and you kind of have to come up with a consistent way to defend, say, Christian theology in this, and that takes like a super autistic way. Kind of the normal way would be just go with whatever the priest is telling you, right? But there are some of these people who just cannot be satisfied with what the priest is telling them. They have to go down to the sources. They read everything. They find these like apparent contradictions in the Bibles or things that don't seem very consistent, at least, or congruent, and they try to come up with a big system that can make all this stuff coherent, right? And that's very similar to the scientific mindset, right? It's kind of a big system builder, right? Kind of like I don't know about Russian, but some other people.
Very similar to Martin Luther, someone like that. That other people are happy there to be these contradictions, these hypocrisies in the Catholic, in the established religion. Other people, for example, with us, other people are prepared. They don't mind the hypocrisies and the contradictions in multiculturalism, let's say. Whereas the idea that you're pro multiculturalism, but yet you live in an all white area. But
yes, it seems a straight thing.
They care about that. What they care about more than truth is other things. They care about power. They care about getting on with people. They care about other things, and they're therefore prepared to ignore these truth problems because they just don't care as much about that. Whereas autistics are fundamentally obsessed with the truth, and this would militate in favor of them noticing these problems, of them coming up with trying anyway to come up with a broader coherent system. So that's on the one hand, I would say, yes, you could argue that systems of morality do come out, also codified systems of morality come out of people like that. On the other hand, I would say that of the 5 moral foundations, you would expect the autistics to be interested in sort of authority and order and structure, perhaps in in-group loyalty, perhaps in disgust to some extent, because that involves order.
The autistic ones. I would guess that autistics are really into utilitarianism, because that's the only kind of big coherent kind of system you can easily make in ethics. And if you look at Coffee Salon Demographics, if that's a blog post by Anatoly Karlin, I think you had him on here as well. And he goes through a lot of these like kind of intellectual kind of environments where that used to be kind of a go to a coffee salon and sit and having intellectual talks. And so one of these that are very interested in or very related to utilitarianism is the effective altruism, which is kind of a left-wing utilitarianism cult of sorts. And they're all about how do we be effective altruists, right? So they're like, we need to do kind of we need to do good by utilitarian judges or utilitarian framework. So that's like, how do we find the least happy people and how do we make them more happy? So like, how do we boost the happiness of Africans, something like that.
Whereas the other people, it doesn't work like that. There's just certain precepts that's it. Like you have to be nice, the golden rule, something like that.
Right.
The next question comes from, I think I did that. Is addiction under selection? I think I did that last week. And the answer is, I think I did that, didn't I? Maybe I didn't do that. I can't remember. I think the addiction is heritable. I'm not sure if I looked at is addiction under selection. Is addiction under selection? What do you think, Emil? I think it must be under negative.
If you are on selection, it's probably probably a little bit negative. I mean, what do you mean? Which addictions? Because I think some of them are probably positive, right?
Which addiction? But in general, as I understand, at least among men, people that are alcoholics. If I would look at alcoholism,
alcoholics, they have fewer kids, but like smokers have more kids, right? Because smoking is kind of an ADHD, lower IQ thing. It's also sociable, right?
Women who smoke do not conceive as efficiently as non-smokers. It's both male and female smokers about twice the rate of infertility, but that's medical infertility.
Right.
So no, I don't know about that. I would have thought that. I mean, as I understand it, there's evidence that extroversion is under selection. Extroverts are
very strongly.
So, and extroversion correlates with being addicted to things, doesn't it?
Yeah,
because but then conscientiousness, also low conscientiousness correlates with being addicted to things, and I think that's people that are low in conscientiousness tend to we're selecting for K traits, and that's an R trait. So I don't know. I'm not sure. I think there's things in different directions, but I'm not sure. I'm aware.
So it depends on alcoholism and like hard drugs or what, like more than that. Weed. I think that stuff will be under negative selection. So we're evolving less addictiveness, so to say. But smoking probably would be on a positive selection. And so since these two kind of clusters of trait, they share genetic basis, so they kind of go in both ways at once. So I guess we're involving genetic basis to become more addicted to cigarettes, but actually cigarettes are being phased out of society for environmental reasons because we're being increasingly harsh on them.
Become more addicted to food.
Yeah, so now we get fan instead. So computer games and some other food.
That would be interesting if that's under if that's under selection. Okay, the next question comes from James Cloverdance, and he says, "Thank you very much, sir. $10. Are the mutations responsible for outlier high IQ comorbid with other possibly negative mutations? Could those negative mutations be removed over time, leaving only the benefits of high intelligence?" There is evidence, as I understand it, that high IQ, very high IQ, is comorbid with all kinds of problems, and that could, such as asthma, autism.
I don't know about that one, but I think there are some studies with a very high IQ. So typically it's like SMPY, this study of mathematically precocious use, and the Terman sample, right? So like once you go beyond say 150 or something like that, very, very far, and then there seems to be quite high rates of these like autoimmune kind of diseases, or at least. But this stuff, as far as I understand, is based on self-report. And so my hypothesis for this is that you are no more likely to have these things when you're very smart, high IQ. The thing that you are is that you are very good at diagnosing yourself. So you end up with tons of diagnosis because you're kind of obsessed about getting everything right. Whereas a lower person would kind of say, "Oh, I can't run very far," and then they never bother to get a diagnosis. So you get this diagnostic bias with IQ, and I think that can explain many of these.
All I would note about that is that there is evidence that what you would expect is if you had outlier high IQ by just genetic chance, which is what happens with these geniuses, they're relatively normal, intelligent parents, and they have outlier high IQ. Then if that's due to a mutation, then you might expect that happens to be a positive mutation. Then you would expect those people to be just in general perhaps high mutational load. And therefore they'd have other negative mutations. And certainly,
mostly when you get like a super smart person from normal parents, it's not because of new mutations, right? It's because of the reshuffling of genetic, material the parents already had, right?
If it was due, that's true. But if it was, that's true. But it's.
I don't think this makes a lot of sense. I think a better answer would be the Ashkenazi stuff.
A lot of these people that are regarded as highly intelligent, and even Francis Galton looked at this, had like very sickly childhoods. They're very, very ill.
Those are the ones. You'd have to do a more systematic study. So I guess we can write to the owners of the SMPY and tell them to do an actual medical history of these people, something objective. But there is one in line with what the question asker was asking about, is that if you look at the Ashkenazis, who have, most people think they have been under strong positive selection for intelligence, and the way they got the smartest by getting new mutations that they were then selected for, and they were kind of selected for despite having these weird disease impacts, right? And so in the Ashkenazis, there's tons of these strange inbred diseases, and many of them have to do with these neurological traits. So it would seem that many of these relate to mutations that both give you high IQ and also give you illness.
It's not the intelligent ones that have those, though, is it? It's the flip side of them.
No, it can be the intelligent ones, because it can be, for instance, maybe they can be what is that word? Heterozygous advantage, right? So it's better to have one copy than two, kind of like the sickle cell thing.
If you have two copies, you have the problem, and if you have one copy, you're highly intelligent.
You could still be even smarter by having two copies. You just die early, you see. So it depends on which trait you're looking at. If you're looking at fitness, yeah, they have lower fitness if you have two copies, but you have even higher IQs.
I see. But those be removed over time. Only the benefits of higher intelligence. Who can tell? I mean, it's
there are some small studies of this where they look at like patients who had like these weird Jewish diseases, and they do seem to have elevated IQs according to Cochrane anyway. But I haven't really seen any replications of this, and maybe it won't replicate. But theoretically, yes.
Okay, theoretically, yes. Okay, Jovan Lipovitz says, what are the lifestyle outcomes for adults who were adopted by same-sex couples, income, employment, etc.? I think I would say it's probably too early to say, because in Britain, I don't know when same-sex adoption was legalized, only in the last 20 years, I think. So I'm not aware that there would be any good evidence on that at all. But I would think it's just far too early to say. What do you think?
There was one recent meta-analysis on the adoption outcomes by gay parents compared to the heterosexual ones, right? And I think that one showed that there were some negative things, mainly like well-being or stuff like that. The way you could think of it is that there is some shared environment component to child well-being, and so something that's affected by parents and also siblings. And so kind of these gay parents, they're not. I mean, they're probably a bit higher IQ than the normal heterosexual ones, but they're probably maybe also a bit more wealthy, but they're also much more neurotic. And so, if you think back to your childhood and having like super neurotic parents, they're probably going to do a lot of fighting with each other and this sort of thing. So, what is it? The female ones is lesbians, right? They have like I think really high sexual violence rates. And so, I think that if you're thinking of a child and then watching your parents having physical fights, that seems like it would have a negative impact, at least on your well-being, at least for the time being. And maybe it would fade out over time, like when you're an adult and you move out of the home and the shared environment effect from the parents, it'll go away, right? But at least during the time, you'll probably be a bit lower in that, I would imagine. I didn't memorize exact results of this meta-analysis, but I was thinking it would be something like that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Yehudi Finkelstein, $10. Thank you very much. Says Ed. I disagree that the highwayman in GTA 5 song is an Old West bandit. Clearly, he's an Englishman like Dick Turpin with sword and pistol. The song is about reincarnation. Your thoughts on Siddhartha? It's quite clear in the song, sir, that he is in Colorado in the spring of 1829. So I'm going to have to respectfully disagree. I really do think that he's an American bandit. And as for Siddhartha, I don't know who that is. Is that Buddha? Emil,
no idea.
I don't know who Siddhartha is, sir. So I can't really comment on that. Maybe if you are watching, if you put in the normal chat who Siddhartha is, then I can answer. Yehudi Finkelstein says, Ed, I agree that Martin Luther was a Northern European genius before the excesses of libtards like John Calvin and John Knox. Fancy a debate with E. Michael Jones on this topic? No, I don't really think that would be necessarily a particularly good idea. As you may recall, I had E. Michael Jones on this channel was it last year? And as a consequence of that video, I got a strike, by the way. And he didn't seem to know much about theology at all. He'd never heard of the Proto-Reformation. He thought that the only reason England became Protestant was so that the Protestantism came to England was so that the Protestants could steal, the king could steal money from the monasteries, whereas in reality the dissolution of the monasteries only started in about 1536, and the first Protestant heretic was burnt in 1531. So that's obviously not true. He didn't seem to have much of an understanding, much of a knowledge of English theologians. He'd never heard of John Wycliffe, who was an important Proto-Reformation theologian. So I'm not sure he would know much about the Reformation at all, really, let alone John Knox, who was, of course, a Scottish reformer, or John Calvin. And as for them being libtards or excesses, well, you could argue that there was a genius element to them if this theory of the Protestant work ethic is correct. And if it was correct that part of the expansion of Western countries, and therefore group level genius, if you like, was Protestantism, then Calvin took that to the nth degree, didn't he? I mean, with Calvin, you really have to, with Luther, there's a kind of a degree to which you want to be sure that you're saved, and so does God give you nice things. But with Calvin, the prosperity gospel, as far as I can see it, there's bound to be some Calvinists on here that's going to say no, but is absolutely fundamental, because there's literally an elect of however many, what it is, 100,000 people, and you have to know that you're part of that elect, and you might not be part of that elect.
144, no?
144,000, yeah, and so consequently, you desperately need security and evidence that you're part of that elect if you believe in that theology. Whereas if you are a Lutheran, it could simply, well, why not? Why wouldn't you go to heaven as long as you're committed to Christ? As long as you're committed to Christ, why wouldn't you go to heaven?
As long as you accept Jesus and you don't, what is the one? The Holy Spirit you cannot denounce.
No, and of course that's what Emil, your non-relative, Soren Kierkegaard's father did. He cursed the Holy Spirit. And of course, therefore, he was convinced.
He's forever ungiven, or whatever it is the Bible says. So.
Yeah, he can never be forgiven, and right. His whole family was cursed and whatever, and this had a big effect on.
There is actually one curious way of knowing. So the Protestant work ethic, the typical way they study this is they look at these northern Protestant countries and they go like, yeah, they seem to be high work ethic and so on. You can look at Germans who went to Brazil or Argentina, stuff like, okay, these Germans are also, they seem to be doing well, right? But of course, it's all confounded with this geneticness of the northern Germanic people, or even Germanic people in general, right? But there is another way of doing it. So there's some economists, and what they did is that in Asia, where there wasn't any Protestantism, there was a randomized controlled trial where some of the people, they got treated by the local missionaries, the Protestant missionaries, and the other ones got treated by some other missionaries. And so they converted to Protestantism, and the other ones converted to something else. I forgot what it was. Maybe it was Catholicism, maybe it was Islam or something. And because of those two different ways to get, so I think these were poor people who needed some kind of help. And so you could either get assigned to being treated by the Protestant people. So basically a Protestant priest will take you in, tell you how great Protestantism is, and convert you to Protestantism, and then help you find a job. Or the other people who will just kind of help you find a job. And so they did a follow-up of this, and they showed that the Protestant ones, they did indeed do better over time. So maybe there is something to this cultural Protestantism. Maybe it's not entirely genetic confounding, but I would like to see a replication of this study.
Yeah, I think a big part of it, though, is almost certainly the kind of people that convert to Protestantism in that kind of environment are going to be attracted to new things and whatever. They're probably going to be more intelligent. It was the highly middle class people. The Protestantism was dominated by the middle class in England. They're more intelligent people, and so they're the ones that become Protestants. I'm not sure that there's going to be that much in Calvinism. Whereas with it's a manifestation of it rather than a cause. But there could be something in it. I mean, if you've got this religion that's telling you that you must behave in this pro-social way, you go to hell, and you really believe that, then you're going to
inspires you to do something real, right? So.
And if you've got this religion that's telling you that God only blesses His own, then it might possibly incentivize you to work harder to make sure that you are blessed. So
it's maybe not just entirely genetic confounding.
There could be something in it, but anyway, if there is something in it, then I would say, Mr. Finkelstein, that you could argue that Calvin was, if anything, more of a genius than Luther. Right, Yehudi Finkelstein, Dutty, my uncle Lou Duver always told me, why would anyone be a Tory? Please tell me that your cat Margaret is not named after the worst PM in British history. Well, I'm not sure if he's the worst PM in British history, sir. You have a situation where the country has collapsed down into an extreme left-wing situation where there's been far too much emphasis for far too long on care and on equality, and not enough emphasis on hierarchy, on in-group loyalty, and on disgust response. And therefore, you have a situation where we're in an evolutionary mismatch with a poor, sick man of Europe Europe, and people are increasingly unhappy, and they vote in the Conservative Party, and it sort of shakes things up a bit and takes away the power of the left for a bit. Although while that was happening, and there was a leftist cultural march through the revolution, through the institutions, and so then you have a leftist reaction eventually against her. So I don't think she was the worst prime minister in history. But no, she's not named after Margaret Thatcher. A lot of people think that. She's named after the sketch in Little Britain, which has now been cancelled, of course, by the Black Lives Matter movement. Little Britain, where there's a man that walks into a shop and played by David Walliams, who asked for something really obscure. And the guy at the counter, played by the fat guy, says, "I don't know. I'll have to ask I'll have to ask Margaret, who's off screen and upstairs. Margaret, like that." And then Margaret eventually goes, "Yes." And so it was named after that. It was my wife's idea, and it was named after the character from Little Britain, Margaret. Okay, Yehudi Finkelstein, $3. Thank you very much, sir. Says Ed, my facial.
A lot of questions.
Sorry, he does.
He has a lot of questions.
Generous donators to our channel is Yehudi Finkelstein. He says, Ed, my facial profile is similar to Harold Godwinson. How on earth do you know what Harold Godwinson looks like? Have we found his skull? Last time, you were basically on the Bayeux Tapestry. So Mr. Finkelstein's a cartoon sort of character. Last time at the dentist, I needed 4 shots of anaesthetic before they could operate on me. Why do gingers need more anaesthetic? Interesting. I'll turn that over to Emil. Emil, do you have any idea on that?
I don't think they need. I don't know. There is a definitely. If you look at sexual weirdo kink stuff, and you look at people who have weirdo sexual kinks, there's a stereotype that redheads are more kinky, and so that could be related to pain receptors. And I think there are some studies on this, and I don't know whether they replicated or not. And if we are to guess from just kind of an armchair guess, they probably didn't replicate, but maybe. Of course, also redheads are. Tend to be quite northern, or either Northern European or Irish, right? And so maybe there's something with these people that have them, maybe they're more have more dull pain receptors or something. So I don't know if this guy if he's an American, then he could be some kind of European mudblood, and over there, then in American data, you'd get an association between hair color and pain receptors that doesn't exist, for instance, in Denmark, because in American there would be different kinds of European mixes, and the ones with red hair would be predominantly Irish or Northern, right?
Yeah, but why would people? I don't know. So I know that people that are red-haired are higher in estrogen, and I don't know if people. But I understood that men feel pain worse than women, so that wouldn't necessarily make any sense. I suppose it could just be that ginger hair is new. It's probably the newest hair color. It's the newest thing that's manifested, and so therefore it hasn't had time to be selected properly yet, such that all of the weird mutational load that goes with it has been removed.
No, probably not. It's small gene variations in existing genes, right?
And it's frequency dependent selection that seems to sustain gingerness, as I've discussed on here.
Yeah, but I don't think it's associated with anything else genetically speaking. But it can be associated with other things through associative mating. So for whatever reason, people who have weird pain receptors, if they at some time develop a preference for red-headed people, then genetically speaking, in the next generation, these traits will become genetically correlated, even if the genes that do stuff are unrelated, right? So you can by non-random mating, you can induce genetic correlations between any set of traits, even when there's no genetic overlap. And so theoretically, this thing could happen with redheads and stuff.
Yeah,
so I don't really know, but
it could happen because also they're very unlike. In general, people find them unattractive, redhead people, particularly redhead men. But there is this with men particularly. There's this desire for difference, something weird and different, and hedge your bets genetically. So you want to go out with the ginger girl just because she's ginger, just because she's different, and this seems to then sort of keep it in the population. But it can't go above a certain level because it's not different anymore, and so therefore you get this. It's very complicated. Yes. Gingerness, and as I'm not ginger, I can't be buggered to research it in a great deal of detail. It hasn't really affected my life. But if I was ginger, perhaps I'd
then you would research it, and then you'd marry a ginger woman and have more ginger kids and so on. And we get another round of this.
I know, I think so, but I think at the moment I will leave it. Okay, the next question comes from Mr. Steve Rogers, and he says $5 today. If we brought back a European hunter-gatherer with cloning, what would they be like in terms of IQ and GFP?
Well, we kind of don't need to bring them back because we have them still in Sardinia, no?
Well, yeah.
But if you look at Sardinia, is kind of Sardinia is an island close to Italy and France, right? It's kind of in the middle there between, and it's a genetic isolate because the Anatolian farmers who kind of spread from Turkey up through Europe, they didn't apparently find sailboats to go to this one island, or maybe the locals there killed them when they came.
I thought it was that the Sardinians were genetically totally Anatolian farmer with no influence from Aryans.
No, as I recall, they lacked the farmer ones, but I mean that's just from what I recall. But anyway, I don't think if you can look at the Inuits. So we have a lot of people who were hunter-gatherers until very recently, and now we have a bunch of Inuit farmers and so on. There doesn't seem to be large IQ gaps or something between these. I've never seen a study on the GFP in the Inuit, but maybe you have. Greenlanders.
I think that the IQ would probably it wouldn't be as low as you think. It's just that they're subject to this extremely cold environment and this harsh environment, and so it wouldn't be the farming yet, and so that seems Cochrane and Harpending argue that elevates IQ, that forces a higher IQ, because if you can't have the intelligence to engage in proper farming, then you're finished, you die. And so if that's the case, then with the Inuit, you maybe have an IQ of about 90 or perhaps a bit below that. Because the Inuit are subject to such a harsh environment, so maybe 85, something like that.
Maybe 90, yeah. Hard to say. In recent time, we can find out soon, because we can go totally Jurassic Park on this, and we can get. Of course, we have some genomes of some of these hunter-gatherers already, right? So all you really need to do is someone who wants to volunteer to remove their DNA from an egg and then put in this genome from this hunter-gatherer, and then you can recreate one of them, and so that would be totally doable, probably even with current technology. And so I'm just assuming it's a bunch of a bit of time within 10 years, maybe.
The place with the most hunter-gatherer ancestry is the Baltic states, and I was right. Sardinia, it's the most Neolithic farmer ancestry.
So that's the most farmer then.
The most Neolithic farmer, and they have no hunter-gatherer, and they have no Indo-European. It's just.
But they don't seem to be particularly smart or anything either. Sardinians are kind of a backwards place, right?
Hunter-gatherer ancestry: Baltic states and Finland. 40% hunter-gatherer ancestry. Finland, 36% of females have hunter-gatherer ancestry. So are hunter-gatherer. So that implies the males who were the more dominant and smarter, and with the farmers came and interbred with the hunter-gatherer females, and from there you get Finns. Okay, the next question comes from Doosty, and he says, have you heard of the warrior gene MAOA? Can you talk a bit about its prevalence and usefulness under pre-industrial selection? I've never heard of it. Have you heard of that, Emil?
Oh yeah, the warrior gene, the Mao, whatever. So it's the one with the warrior gene. Yeah, so it's a candidate gene that used to be very popular, and so back when candidate genetics was a thing. And candidate genetics is the thing where instead of doing a GWAS and you just look for all variants in the genome and you kind of do very stringent statistical evidence. And what used to be the case is that they used to come up with like one plausible variant, and then they tested that in one very small sample. And then usually what happened is that they wouldn't replicate. And but that took them like 10 years to realize, academics, because the grant money comes from doing more candidate genetics. So that's what you pay what you get for, or you get what you pay for, right? Anyway, so the Mao ones. So there's newer studies that meta-analyze all these old candidate studies of the this warrior gene, and it has different repeats, like the 2 repeat, 4 repeat, and 3 repeat, and stuff like that. And it has certain ethnic patterns that makes it politically incorrect to study this, and so that's why the left-wings don't want to talk about it. You have, for instance, I think last year we had the Catherine Page Harden or whatever, that woman. She was denouncing this as like very bad and so on. So I don't really think that Mao, this gene, will have a large effect on actual crime rates. But I mean, it would be very nice if they did a replication study in, say, the UK Biobank, which has 500,000 people, and so you will definitely have a few thousand people who have each variant of this in the UK Biobank, and you can see if it predicts crime or whatever in the UK Biobank. Maybe they don't have a crime.
Stig Eid, $30. Thank you very much indeed, sir. Says, Emil, do you agree with Nyborg's finding about male-female IQ gap?
Yeah, pretty much agree with that. So I talk with Helmut often, and The reason in this kind of thing is that you don't often see it is that they tend to construct IQ tests so that the differences go away. Because you see these IQ test construction companies, they are big capitalism, and in these days that means you want to be woke. Because when you have an IQ test that you're selling that has these like inconvenient sex gap, that's bad for business, right? That means people are going to denounce you in the media, so they don't want that. So what you can is that you can engineer the items a little bit, or the tests included, to kind of make the difference become smaller, right? And so that's there is actually reports that this is what they've been doing. And so, but it's still, if you do like a Richard Lynn, you do kind of a meta-analysis of these like Wechsler tests or something, you still get kind of a 2-3 IQ advantage for men. But it would be larger if you included more diverse tests, because there's a whole domain of skills, spatial ability, or these like elementary cognitive things like reaction time and stuff like this. These tests are totally left out of these kind of standard batteries, and they all show a large male advantage, right? So if you were to make a broader battery of tests, you would see the difference more easily. But not only that, is that you have population differences in the sex difference. It's getting complicated. So like the northern population, these like northern European countries have the largest sex difference in male female. And so, for instance, there's a big meta-analysis. The critic site, it will be the one from I think Romania, and it has like very small male advantage in Romania, but maybe like 3 points, 4 points in say Northern Europe. And so it seems to be the case that the same countries in Northern Europe that have more divergent sex interests, right? That when men and women have more divergent job interest in Northern Europe, they also seem to have more divergent IQs, and they also have more divergent specialized abilities, like the verbal tilt is stronger for women in Northern Europe. And it even replicates for Ashkenazis, according to unpublished meta-analysis that we've been doing, that the Ashkenazis, in fact, have an even larger male-female IQ gap than the Northern Europeans, like 7 points or something. It's really large. And so it's kind of interesting. So I don't really know why this is the case. Some years ago in OpenPsych, Davide Piffer, who is famous for his genetic stuff with the populations and so on, he published this paper using the PISA data. And his idea is that there's some proportion of the intelligence genetic basis is X-linked, and so what you get is that if you have directional selection for high IQ, you can get this will actually result insofar as this is related to men, you will get some genetic variants that boost IQ, but only in men. And so this will actually make the gap larger while also increasing the population mean IQ. So that's his genetic hypothesis for why this pattern is there. And it remains a kind of a plausible model, but not quite proven. And so if the theory here is that, of course, that you will eventually find some gene that that's related to either like male hormones and then boosts IQ, but only in relation or only in the presence of male hormones. So that would be kind of the take here. I think Helmut will agree with this take as well.
I certainly found that in Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries, there is no average IQ difference.
Yep, I found the same thing.
And it's not there. And I think the plausible, well, you might be right about Davide, but one plausible hypothesis is just differentiation levels are higher, and so there's more complex society, more differentiation, higher differentiation sex roles, basically. Women
definitely
doing
in kids, it's definitely not there, right?
No, whereas if you look at the African societies or whatever, women have to do a lot of the men's work because the men just dump them and bugger off, you know.
Don't do anywhere.
So you don't get as much differentiation, and so you have this male advantage, but men doing more of the complex stuff.
It's inconvenient for hereditarians because men in these other populations, they still have larger brain sizes, right? And the theory is for hereditarians is that a larger brain size is why men have higher IQs. So when you get this pattern and it fits in Northern Europe, the theory is fine. But when you go to Romania, or you go to Arab countries, and you say, okay, men don't have higher IQs, but they still have larger brains, and then you're back to Lynn's paradox, right? Why do men have larger brains in these countries if they don't have higher IQs? What's the extra brain size for, right? It's very I don't know. It's a good question. So the theory prediction here would be that the male-female difference in brain size should also be larger in Northern European populations as well as Ashkenazis. As far as I know, this has not been investigated, but it's now a risky a risky prediction made by this model, and hopefully we can find an answer soon.
Yeah, there's Morton's skull collection, isn't there? And
yeah, there's some stuff like that. You could try from that. That's a good idea.
That's the different races. Okay, I'm going to wrap up now, but I would like to. I've got a number of questions which I will look at from various people with names like Steve Rogers and Ricky PS and Mike and Lars Birdfeeder and Kevin King and Francis Madden and Niklaus Nick, which I will look at on Thursday at 7 p.m. UK time. I'd like to thank Emil for being here. Remember to subscribe here and subscribe to Emil's channel as well. And
I will post it.
Sorry.
I will post it in the comments.
He will post it. And we will see you soon. And goodbye.